Hi, folks. Thanks for joining today's webinar. I'm going to give everyone another minute to find their places, and then we'll kick things off. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for today's webinar. This will be the H1 2026 Expert Retrospective, where we'll be covering what some recent modern supply chain attacks reveal about TPRM resilience. It's presented in partnership with BlueVoyant and Manifest Cyber. We're really excited to get into this session today. As folks find their seats, I'll take some time to do a little bit of housekeeping. One, this webinar will be recorded, so please feel free to refer back to it later or share with anyone who may have missed out. Additionally, Tony and I really appreciate any questions that you might have. Please be sure to use the Q&A feature built into GoTo, and we'll address as many of those as we have time for at the end of the webinar. And any that we don't have time for, we'll be sure to reach out to you and make sure that it is addressed. Last, we will be running a few polls during the session, so we really appreciate anyone who can answer those polls, and we'll get a sense of who's here and how best to cater this track to the audience. First, I'd like to introduce our main speaker today, Tony Camp. Tony leads product at Manifest Cyber, where the team works on software supply chain security. That covers SBOMs, vulnerability tracking, and the harder problem of figuring out what's actually inside the AI models companies are starting to ship. Before Manifest, Tony led product for container images and ChainGuard. Earlier at GitHub, he was the product manager on GitHub Actions, working on how workflows run and scale at enterprise scale. He came up through engineering before moving into product, which shapes how he thinks about supply chain security from a technical foundations up to the strategic and governance questions on top. He's here today to talk about Team PCP, what it tells us about the gaps in traditional TPRM, and what organizations should actually be doing about it. Tony, super excited to have you here. How you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks, Dan. You make me sound a lot cooler than I actually am, so appreciate the intro.
I think they'll see how cool you are as we go through this. My name is Dan Petrillo. I'm the Vice President of Product Marketing. I, too, came up through engineering. I've deviated probably a little further from the path, but I'm an electrical engineer by degree. I've built quadcopters and then moved my way into building automations, where I was also a product manager, having to secure those systems. So, the technical understanding of how these attacks happen and how to thwart them is near and dear to my heart. I think we'll have a pretty fun conversation today. So what are we going to cover today? This session examines, I didn't fix it. So if you looked at the abstract for this webinar, we said we were going to cover 2 real world attacks. Between when we posted that abstract and today, there have been several more. So you're getting some bonus coverage of about 5 or so distinct attacks. And we're going to extract lessons that they expose about enterprise TPRM posture. And we're going to close with some actionable hardening guidance that you can apply immediately in your business. We'll start with an introduction on the rising tide of software supply chain attacks. We'll then do a deep analysis of a few of these attacks from Team PCP, Bitwarden CLI, Vercel and Context AI, and the OAuth attack, as well as Mythos, and I think one more. We're going to talk about why the controls are failing. When you see a rise in attacks like this, we must turn to what are we doing wrong, and we must adjust accordingly. And by doing a root cause analysis of these breaches, that's the first step to becoming more resilient. We'll then talk about what detection capabilities and essential monitoring and intelligence are required to then make sure that these don't happen again, or that they don't happen to you. We'll talk about some practical steps you can take today, and then we'll close with some Q&A. And again, sprinkled in here will be a couple polls that we're excited to engage you with. Speaking of, let's bring the first poll on the screen, if you would, please. Okay, so poll one. When you hear about a major supply chain attack in the news, what's your first reaction? Is it we're well prepared, our TPRM program is designed for this? Is it we'd find out after the fact, we have limited visibility? Is it that we immediately assess if any of our vendors are affected? Or we escalate to leadership and hope for the best? And this is anonymous, so do this honestly, even if it's painful to say. Results are coming in. This is always fun to watch.
I feel like there's a hidden one too, is like, okay, what's next? Like in the last month, that's what I've asked myself each time something drops is, okay, what's next?
Yep. Yeah, that's kind of the state we're in, huh? All right, we're seeing the numbers still come in. I'll let them continue to do so. The clear winner right now is we will immediately assess if any of our vendors are affected. And that makes me feel good. That gives me a
That's
little
good.
bit warm and fuzzy. Yeah.
Number
No
two,
one
wait,
hopes
what's
for
number?
the best.
We find out after the fact. Yep, we have limited visibility. Yep. These line up.
Yeah. Okay. So these have slowed down. So we have no one feels that they're designed for this. We have 22% of us feel like we'd find out after the fact as we have limited visibility. 78% immediately assess if any vendors are affected, and another 0 for we escalate to leadership and hope for the best. Well, I think that's about what you'd expect in a sample size this large. And let's talk about some of the things we can do in light of these recent attacks. First, I kind of want to cover the reality of software supply chain attacks today. They're targeting the software supply chain. They're accelerating in frequency, sophistication, and audacity. And I think this point is made by the fact that we published an abstract for this webinar with 2 attacks that we thought were especially daunting and had lessons to learn from. But between that short period, between now and then, we've upped it to 5. And there's a few things that we have to highlight. One is blind spots at scale. Most organizations lack continuous real-time visibility into the software they build and buy and the open source components embedded within. And I don't blame these organizations. I think a lot of it is due to the tooling that has been they've been presented with, and some of the frameworks and some of the maturity models we've been presented with don't actually address this real challenge. And I think this is part of the case that we're making here today, that we need a change in what is considered good TPRM, what is considered best practices. And we need to make some of these difficult challenges viable for more businesses. Second is point in time is not enough. These periodic scans and one-time vendor assessments can't detect threats introduced between review cycles through compromised updates or build pipelines. The threat landscape changes rapidly, and we need to as well. And then last, trust is the attack surface. I actually spent a large part of my career dealing in zero trust, helping to get businesses to where they could achieve zero trust, talking about what it is, what it means, how to do it practically. And I always said, even before I worked in TPRM, that supply chain attacks were the Achilles heel of zero trust, because they're when you take a trusted asset introduced by a trusted user and detonated with privilege, that these things can thrive. So attackers are deliberately targeting the packages, accounts, and tools that receive the highest implicit trust and sometimes explicit trust. This is why it can punch holes through even the most robust zero trust architecture, turning resilience mechanisms into liabilities. So in this session, we're going to analyze these recent confirmed real world incidents and illustrate where these gaps manifest and what must change. Tony, anything you want to layer on, or do you want to just dive into it?
No, I think like one really interesting thing on this last point, trust as the attack surface. Like we have seen with these attacks, namely with like Trivy, Kix, Bitwarden, that the most security conscious organizations weren't the most secure, and when you depend on that, you very quickly set yourself up for potential disaster, and that's what happened here.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So here we have a little bit of a chronology of these past couple months and what happened. There's actually something that happened in February that we'll get into a little bit when we talk about the Context AI breach. But there was a real condensed set of attacks that happened between March 19th and April 29th that we're going to cover. Tony, you want to kind of give a high level before we dive into each one of these individually?
Yeah, and just like I want to stop and look at this for a second because this is crazy. You mentioned before in our intro, like as we were prepping for this a while back, we were looking at a very small set, and every week, every few days, something new came, and it wasn't small, right? These are pretty large things, and as we get into the details in the slides to follow, we see that this all started with a single incident back in February. There were two things that happened. We see this context AI breach, but more importantly, there was also Aqua Security. Aquabot was hit. I'll get into more of those details, but that single event there is what kicked off all of the Team PCP attacks and everything that you see here. So within, I don't know, 6-8 weeks, we've had about 8 attacks. We've kind of bundled a few up here on April 19th with Vercel because we left off Lovable, we left off Axios, some other really large ones as well, um, all in the span of a few weeks. So it's been an exciting time for us, I would say.
Yeah. And I think it just kind of tells the tale that is threat actors are opportunistic. And when an opportunity presents itself, they get to work. And I think that's been exemplified here. So let's start with the Team PCP attack campaign that started on March 19th and is hopefully, winding down, but that can't be said confidently.
Yeah. Let's hope. I mean, we did see in the middle of the attacks, we saw them take a break for about a month and then come back strong again. Going back to where this all starts, late February, and again, a credential was stolen from Aqua. They were notified about it. They did what they needed to do. They started their credential rotation, but we find out not too much longer, March 19th, that rotation was incomplete, and this is where Team PCP comes into the picture. So they pick up that leftover credential, they use it to compromise Trivy. And then from Trivy, we see Cascade. 2 days later, they hit check marks. 2 days after that, Light LLM, some very interesting advanced techniques in order to get into Light LLM. After that, they hit Telnex, another PyPy package, and then the campaign goes quiet for a few weeks. And in that time, we see the rise, or we see announcements from Axios that was not Team PCP related, a completely different, very interesting attack vector using AI to impersonate a company that was interested in partnering with Axios. We see Lovable, we see Vercel get hit during that time, and then Team PCP picks right back up. And where they picked up, it was very interesting. Again, they hit check marks again. This time they did target a few different things, Docker Hub images, also a VS Code extension. But yeah, they attacked that same GitHub action from the first wave in early March or mid March. This is what led to the Bitwarden exploit as well, but we're not 100% sure if that was actually Team PCP. A lot of the patterns were the same, but we don't know if it was actually them or not. They reused that poisoned action. They got credentials, and they did something new here, which was really interesting, is that they were able to use those credentials to mint and to get into OIDC to mint an NPM token to publish the a poisonous version of that NPM package on NPM using their trusted trusted mechanism. So this was something like you hear a lot of make sure you're not using long-lived credentials, long-lived tokens. This was very short-lived. They were able to get access. They were able to use that. They were able to connect to OIDC, execute it, mint the token, and get it published to NPM. Pretty crazy. So all of this, one credential failure in February. By April, we had 8 named victims, quite large. and hopefully it's over, but maybe they're just taking a break again. Yet to be seen.
Yeah, here's hoping. I mean, it kind of exemplifies that kind of corny notion that you hear in cybersecurity, that is, the defenders have to be right every time. The threat actors just have to be right once, and they got that opportunity, and they sure capitalized. And let's dive into some of the ways that they, well, I guess in this case, not necessarily Team PCP, but these threat actors have been capitalizing on this opportunity with the Vercel Context AI OAuth attack.
Yeah, sure. So again, this happened during that break in the Team PCP timeline. But, we've mentioned Axios and Lovable were also hit during that time. But the details on this Vercel one were starting on April 19th, they disclosed that they had been compromised. The chain doesn't start there. It starts back with that Context AI attack late February. And it was an AI productivity tool. A context employee gets hit with an info stealer malware called Luma Stealer. So this again starts with Context AI. A month later, a Vercel employee connects their Google Work Suite with this plugin, this AI Office Suite plugin that Context AI provides. This was compromised. So they were able to use stolen OAuth tokens out of that system to access the Google Workspace for that Vercel employee, and then pivot directly into Vercel's employment. That stolen data ends up being listed on breach forms for around 2 million. I don't have 2 million. I don't know if you have 2 million, Dan, but that's a lot of data. And again, like this starts with a single employee installing a tool, getting it authorized against their Google Workspace. And from a TPRM perspective, Context AI probably didn't exist. And from an attack perspective, Context AI was the entry point. This is how they got in. I think you're asking yourself maybe like what you can do, and I'm sure Dan and I can both tell you about like how our companies can help, but we also want to give you some kind of suggestions that fall outside of that too, that you can just do immediately. So first and foremost, like anything that you're using, pay attention to the permissions. If you're connecting to any outside plugins, extensions, know what they do, understand what they do, but more important, like audit regularly. Most identity providers will let you audit. They'll let you govern third-party app permissions. And the first time a lot of organizations run that audit, they find tools they didn't even know existed with scopes that they didn't even know that they had granted. So it just takes a little bit of homework there, can go a long way, and could have certainly helped in this case.
Yeah, I think part of the challenge, you have it highlighted here as the first bullet under ecosystem reach, was no contractual relationship between Vercel and Context AI. And I think a lot of times when folks look at their vendor ecosystem, they might start with that kind of audit. Can you like expand on why that might have made it difficult?
As far as the audit side of it, or which piece?
Yeah, just having them, yeah, the audit side of it.
Yeah. So again, like, if you have the tooling that can, and most do, that allow you to audit what's being connected, where it's being connected, who has given it privileges and what privileges that it has, you can very quickly go in there and inspect, like, does anything look a little fishy? Is there anything that really should be used inside of inside of our environments? And then very quickly, reach out to the person that set that up, figure out what's going on, and then get it shut off if that's the right call. Sometimes there's things that appear on there that your engineering team is using. You can see it in mass. Then you just have to have a larger discussion of like, hey, if we're introducing something new, we need to have like, there's processes that we got to go through to make sure that this is the right thing to use, that this is approved, that this is safe and secure, and then that we can roll it out at scale. Otherwise, yeah, you can end up doing exactly what happened here with Vercel. You're connecting it to a workspace. That workspace has got access privileged. You get into the actual environment itself, and you're in trouble.
Yeah. So I think what this highlights is, this formal type of audit is essential. You can't just go to procurement and say, "Hey, give me a list of all of our contracts," and we'll start there. So, yeah, that's that to me really stood out. Okay, Mythos.
Mythos. It's
Yeah.
going to be it's going to save the world and it's going to ruin the world, right?
Yes.
Like we're yet to be seen what this thing can do, but we've heard all of the rumors, that's for sure. I don't know what you've heard, Dan.
Quite a bit. We're actually got a SC magazine op-ed being published today on the
Nice.
topic, but that takes a slightly different perspective on it. Let's talk about it as it pertains to this specific unauthorized access.
Yeah, but I mean, first, man, did you get are you on that list for early access? Are you in there playing with that model right now?
Not so much.
You can't talk about it. We get it. We can't talk about it. We understand. No, yeah, this. I mean, hopefully everyone knows about Mythos now at this point. New model from Anthropic, very security focused, able to find vulnerabilities, 0 days, things that have existed for I think what they said was like 20 years. They were finding vulnerabilities. Pretty interesting. Pretty. Who knows what this thing can do when it comes out. Only 8 companies had access to this. 8 US companies. We're looking at like Google, Microsoft, I think JP Morgan Chase, financial institute. Only 8 people or 8 companies have access to this. Very powerful model. And then we hear April 21st that some of this has been leaked. Very interesting, right? And I love where it was leaked. I used to play video games a lot growing up and have seen the rise of Discord, and this thing was leaked on Discord. It was disclosed in April. It was accessed without authorization through a third-party vendor environment. Apparently, they were working with a contractor. I don't know if the contractor's credentials were leaked, but it got into it was involved with a third-party vendor environment. The contractor's still valid credentials with that vendor were leaked. That was the entry point. There was also some guessing with like API endpoints for them to be able to get access to certain things. And yeah, very interesting story. I'm surprised we haven't heard more and more about this, given how much Mythos has been in the news and how much it's going to impact our industry as a whole. But again, like this is one of the biggest companies in tech right now, Anthropic. They had their most prized possession leaked on a Discord channel. So, it doesn't matter how big you are, you just need to make sure that you are securing what you can. And, like what you can do about this isn't dramatic. Again, it's like inventorying non-employee identities that have any sort of access to any of the environments, and making sure you're auditing contractors, partners, and vendor support as well. And then second, enforce some expiration on contractor creds by default. Don't do it after the fact. Because employment and signals don't flow the way that they do for normal employees, right? It's not like a standard employee that's exiting. The way that you handle that with vendors and contractors is a little bit different. So just make sure you're doing what you can there, and set those precautions up in place.
Yeah, all good points. And, I hope we don't hear much more about this. But if we do, we might have to spin up a part two of this webinar where we cover the impacts of this. Again, I genuinely, sincerely hope we don't have to do that. But considering what this thing can do, I'm not super optimistic.
Yeah, it's gonna be a wild one. So everyone buckle up.
Indeed. All right. 4 of 5. Let's talk about Bitwarden April 22, just a week or two ago.
Yeah, I think I don't know if you meant to lead into this with that wave two talking about Mythos and hoping it never happens, but here we have a wave two that happened. So this time with Bitwarden, the wave two that I'm referring to is check marks. This comes back to check marks. So in April, Team PCP comes back. They are able to repoison a GitHub action along with Docker Hub images and a VS Code extension. And it just so happens that Bitwarden was using that repoisoned checkmark actions. Again, this was the same action that got poisoned back in March 19th, I believe. So it's that same action from back then. When that action runs in their pipeline, it does something that we hadn't seen in this campaign before. And I don't think, according to a lot of the research I did, but we've seen it before. So it uses Bitwarden's GitHub Actions OIDC token in real time to mint a short-lived npm publishing credential, and then immediately uses that credential to publish a malicious version of Bitwarden to npm. So again, that whole attack happens with a token that didn't exist 5 minutes earlier, which is crazy. We talk about making sure long-lived credentials are out of your environment, out of your system as much as possible. That would not have helped in this instance. Very interesting new attack. Yeah.
I love MITRE ATT&CK framework. I'm constantly following it. And techniques tend to grow. I'm not sure this is a new technique, but I think we're going to see probably some new sub techniques or new procedures, at least based on this. This is pretty novel.
Yeah, and look, they got compromised because they used a checkmarks GitHub action, which is compromised through credentials harvested from the Trivy hack earlier. So you have three vendors deep on this one.
Yeah,
Again, pretty interesting.
wild.
So,
All right, let's do one more in the doom and gloom, and then we'll turn to something a little more positive. Let's talk about April 29th. What happened?
yeah, April 29th, which is crazy, just a week ago. Again, as we're prepping for this, new things are coming out all the time. So Team PCP comes back again. They're hitting 4 official SAP and NPM packages. I also believe they did a PyPy as well. Can't remember off the top of my head. But those combined packages got about 572,000 downloads per week. Both Wiz and Socket attribute the campaign to Team PCP, and this was the mini Shai Hulud. So now another throwback to, I believe the first Shai Hulud was November-ish. So this was what they were calling the mini Shai Hulud, and there's a reason that they were saying this. So the pattern here was self-propagation. The mini Shai Hulud used harvested GitHub tokens to inject malicious workflows into the victim's repos, which then would steal more credentials from those victims. It would push a public GitHub repo to that victim's account with all of the credentials that were stolen and leaked. The description on of that repo that was created was a mini Shai Hulud has appeared. So that's why we're getting this name from that. Over 1,100 of those repos were reported during that week. And the kind of an interesting bit here is the exfiltration channel was the victim's own infrastructure, was their own GitHub account, their own GitHub organization and repos. There was
Wow.
no like malicious C2 traffic to block or anything to
Yeah.
detect there. It was all happening in their own repositories.
Dang. So yeah, living off the land at its finest.
Yeah.
That's scary.
Absolutely. And again, like, what are some things that we can do? And I think very important, we talk about this coming up as well, is like, make sure that you're pinning things, pinning to immutable identifiers, SHAs and digests. Audit your dependency tree as much as possible, like inventory everything that you have, understand what uses what depends on what. We talked about this earlier about getting long-lived tokens out of CI/CD. It's not going to be a cure-all, but it will definitely help in a majority of those cases. The mitigations don't change. The case for them just keeps getting stronger and stronger.
I hate this attack, but the nerd in me really appreciates the Dune and Pokemon reference in one. Maybe that's a little too much in the nerdy weeds, but a mini Shai Hulud has appeared. Yeah, it's
Yeah, they listen. Brilliant marketers, right?
yeah, I know. Maybe we can get them to come over to the good side. Who knows?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm actually going to go back for a second and look at this timeline and just like so it all can kind of sink in. Tony, I really appreciate your breakdown. You really helped make it digestible and understandable. And we didn't want to talk about these attacks just because they're interesting and fun. Not necessarily fun, but interesting to explore. We want to talk about them because I think there's lessons to be learned here. Something happened, right? And it had a lot of impact in the industry. And if we don't learn from it, it's going to happen again. So, if you look at this concentration of attacks, there's probably something that could have been done at the early onset that would have actually dealt with many of these. So now we'll go to kind of why these controls failed and what you need instead. We looked at all these attacks and we looked at the root causes. We're both engineers, as we said. We like to do the root cause rather than the symptoms, so that we can stop these from happening in the future. And there were only really 5 main ones across these 5 attacks: stolen and mismanaged credentials, and that is first for a reason. Implicit trust in the ecosystem. Again, I think, even with zero trust, if you look at the zero trust framework, some of these companies might have even adhered to it pretty well and they were still impacted. No real-time dependency visibility, and that real time is absolutely critical. Point in time scanning gaps and known exposures. If you take this lens, you can start to look at what required detection and response capabilities you would need to be resilient against this type of threat. So, continuous inventory monitoring, not in point in time. Things change too fast for that. Behavioral analysis, not just static analysis. You're going to have to look at how these things are acting in order to properly detect them and thwart them. I think static IOCs are not reliable enough. Um, Credential and token integrity monitoring, that was, I think, something that came up several times as we talked through these. Supply chain threat intelligence, we if we had real-time intelligence and understanding, I think, our poll kind of talked about this. We have to know what's happening out there, and we have to react accordingly, and we have to react fast. Pinning to SHAs and digests, Tony, you might want to double click on this one, and then the next one was short-lived credentials and OIDC, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, looking at all of these attacks, there were several that followed a very similar pattern. We're going to focus on the trivia attack right now. So in that trivia attack, Team PCP rewrote 76 out of 77 release tags of the action. Right, anyone that was pinned to a specific SHA was unaffected because they're pinning to a very specific version. If the code changes, obviously the SHA changes, and then they're not getting that poison version that was pushed up. Pinning eliminates an entire class of tag override attacks. The trade-off is that you do have to update on a schedule, because like pinning without updating is its sort of own kind of dangerous piece. So you want to make sure when you are pinning that you are kind of reevaluating and then updating accordingly. And then for the short-lived credentials and OIDC, we saw with Bitwarden, but even before that, the credentials are very important here. Long-lived credentials have always been cited as something very dangerous that you should not rely on. You should always be relying on short-lived credentials. It's very sound advice. OIDC eliminates a lot of those long-lived credential problems that enabled a lot of this campaign, but it has some limits. Bitwarden was using OIDC, and they were also using trusted npm publishing, and that was abused. There was no single mitigation is the whole answer here. It's going to take a combination of everything that we're talking about today in order to give yourself the most defensible stance that you can have.
Nice. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think a lot of these are really actionable, and we really hope that some of these lessons drawn will make it so that we don't have to do a webinar like this again.
Yeah.
If we do, though, I'd be glad to, Tony. So yeah, additionally, interoperable controls and validated workflows are going to be essential. And then last, vendor risk tiering. I know as a practitioner, it's probably frustrating to hear, do all these things, especially when we're saying do all these things across 30,000 vendors, and it's not really fully realistic. So make sure you tier your vendors by risk level. Most of your software vendors are going to be in that high risk category, but that vendor risk tiering is essential so that you can triage and make the most impact with your minutes, because I know those are fleeting and few and far between. Anything else, Tony, before we move on?
No, not really. I mean, I was doing some mapping on on those left-hand side, like where some of these, the root causes, where they landed directly in the attacks. I think, some of the important ones, I just want to start with that very first one, the stolen and mismanaged credentials, because that was sort of the catalyst for everything, starting with Aqua and Aquabot. That PAT, that personal access token, was compromised. That is what kicked off all of the following attacks. So it went into Trivy. That's what they used to get into the Trivy action, and that's what they used then to get to check marks. That's what they used to get to light LLM. It all started right there. So when someone is hit, and yes, they were notified, they did try to do the right thing. They did go and rotate credentials. Unfortunately, they missed one, and that single one is what kicked off all of this, all of the chain of events here. So trying to do the right thing, I understand, but this is very imperative. When you hear that these things have happened, you just have to do that due diligence, make sure that that rotation is complete, it's 100% accurate, so we don't lead into the last 8 weeks we've had.
That's right. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, that, like I said, we put number one for a reason. All right. So conclusion and key takeaways. We try to keep these webinars quick and punchy and leave time for questions. So one, these supply chain attacks represent a clear and present danger to every organization that builds on open source or relies on third-party tooling, which might just be every organization. First, I think it was Socrates who said, "Know thyself." That is your foundation. Know what you're running, know where it's running, know where it lives in your ecosystem, your dependencies, and who owns them. This is the foundation for acting on any exposure. We really have to have this understanding before we can begin to act and become more resilient. Second, trust is the attack surface. Adversaries are deliberately targeting the packages, tools, and accounts that receive the most implicit trust. Again, we're seeing us try to limit trust. I think zero trust is over a decade old at this point. And we're, as a whole, doing a pretty good job at limiting the implicit trust, but it's still there. And sometimes explicit trust is granted to these pieces of software that have been impacted by an attack, and that makes it a real challenge. But it's one that we can't ignore. Your security scanner is not immune. Your most popular npm package is not immune. Keep that in mind. And then last, continuous, and this is the key word here, continuous visibility is non-negotiable. The point in time assessments that I think, were maybe reliable when the pace of the threat actor was a little slower, and the periodic scans are no longer applicable or effective enough. They leave a dangerous window of exposure. Effective defense requires real-time awareness of dependency changes and behavioral anomalies. I believe, we'll have a poll after this, but any conclusions or key takeaways that might have been missed on this slide, Tony, that you'd like to layer on?
No, not. I think the slide is sound, right? Really solid. I think this first one, know thyself, is obviously one of the most important pieces on here. And when you think about the software and the way that it's organized, it's not always just a single repo is where all of the code, where all of the vulnerabilities might lie in your product. You might have, a physical product that has things like, firmware that has multiple different software moving parts, big, it might be dozens of repos kind of boil up into a single product. So while, yes, you want to know what you're running, you want to make sure it's organized in a way that it's easy to go back and hunt and go back and find and understand what's running, where it's exactly running, who's impacted if something goes down, and like how do we communicate with those folks. But yeah, knowing where it lives in your ecosystem, obviously, like that's exactly what I'm talking about. Knowing your dependencies, and not just your dependencies, but obviously your dependencies, things that are being installed at runtime that you might not be sure because it's not labeled correctly or whatever. All very important things. So to me, this know thyself is the number one here for a reason, and it's hits home right now for me.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you. Let's do another poll if we could kick that off. After today's session, what's the biggest gap you want to address in your supply chain defense strategy? Is it improving visibility into third-party vendor risk rather? Is it turning risk findings into consistent remediation workflows? Is it stronger internal and leadership buy-in for TPRM investment? Or is it integrating TPRM into our broader enterprise risk framework? This one's a little tough. You might want to choose more than one, but maybe try to pick the biggest challenge that we're facing. All right, this one's seeing a little bit more of an even spread than the first one.
Yeah, I had my sights on one. I don't want to try to influence anyone, but I had my sights set on one of the answers as soon as it came up.
Yeah, you might have some sway. So let's hear it once it settles. Okay, I think we've slowed down. So coming in at number one, but not by a huge margin, is improving visibility into third-party vendor risk. Number two is turning findings into consistent remediation workflows. I sympathize with that challenge. Number three is integrating TPRM into our broader enterprise framework. Google Chrome wants me to update. That would be hilarious if that pushes, despite me delaying it. And then last is integrating, or sorry, and then we have 0% for stronger internal and leadership buy-in for TPRM investment. I love to hear that. That's often been a challenge. Is like we know what to do, we just can't get it funded. And I think maybe attacks like these might be a necessary evil to get folks to turn their attention and their dollars towards it. Um, Now that we're finished with our polls, let's take some questions from the audience. As we do these questions, if you're interested in a customized demo with our experts, please feel free to scan the code below. We do appreciate your participation. And again, I maybe didn't make this explicit before, but Manifest Cyber and BlueVoyant are partnering to help businesses like yours with the challenges like the ones we've presented, whether that's some of the things we've covered here or outside of that. We're happy to talk to you about what challenges you might face and see if there's a fit. But again, we wanted to give you a presentation today on this threat landscape and some things that you can do today pragmatically and right away. So, all right, questions are coming in. Let's see. First one we have is I like this one. Does AI have a place in TPRM? I definitely have thoughts. Tony, you want to go first?
Yeah, let me ask you a question. Do you know all of the various AI tooling and systems that you're relying on that your vendors are using?
Me, no.
Yeah, and I think that's where we're at. So like you're looking at anything from the models that were trained to you that were trained to build the products that your vendors are providing. You're talking about any like we're looking at new artifacts now to enrich your experience with AI. Things like skills files, things like agent sub-agent personas. All of them are markdown files. All of these things can be malicious. They can do some crazy things. My hot take is that the next big um, round of exploits that we're going to see are going to originate with inside of markdown files because of everyone's reliance on AI tooling. So it's like for us, we need to understand what we're inheriting just because we're using somebody else, because we are partnered with somebody else, and what that vector looks like, I suppose. But of course, 100% it has a place.
Yeah, I think you think about security for AI and AI for security, and both need to rise equally. I think there's certainly ways that we can use AI to deal with some of the rapid changes that we're seeing. Like threat actors are picking up the pace. AI is certainly a mechanism that could allow us to pick up the pace. But if we don't do it cautiously, we'll probably see more detriment than we see gains. So
1,000%.
yeah. Cool. Um, any tips for getting stubborn vendors to act? I sympathize with this one. I'll put some thoughts in this, and then you can layer on if you'd like to, Tony. One is be specific. If you tell a vendor, they're not compliant or they're outside of your risk tolerance, but don't tell them why and how. It's a pretty overwhelming and tough challenge for them that will likely get ignored. If you say specifically what is wrong and what needs to be done about it, you have a much better chance of getting them to act. And make sure you choose the most important thing first, not everything at once. That to me is the key. Give them bite-sized pieces. Tell them exactly where to go and what needs to be done. That's essential. Anything in your
Yeah, this one's tough. I as well sympathize with whoever put this one out there. I think you want to approach it with a partnership in mind. Everyone has a lot of things that they need to work on at all times. When you're approaching a vendor and asking them to do some work, um, you need to approach it from a place of making sure that you're coming from a good place, that you want to improve the current situation. You're not attacking them for hey, why aren't you doing X, Y, and Z. So like that's first start. Second is unfortunately, like the bigger you are, the more weight you can throw around, like that's going to help get stubborn vendors to act as well.
yeah.
But I really love what you said, Dan, is like being able to be very specific, pinpoint, help them get to understand what you're seeing, why this is impacting you, and even offering the help, like, here's what I found, here's like some diagnostics I've run, here is specifically what we're seeing and how it's impacting us. It will go a long way.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. I think we're at quarter of, so we'll try to stop. But I want to jam one more in, a buzzer beater, if I may. What's the best use case for SBOMs in TPRM? And I'll throw that one to you, Tony.
Best use case for SBOMs and TPRM. I think part of it, obviously, we talked about this before, understanding your dependencies, your blast radius. If anything were to happen, you know where to go look, you know where to go remediate, and you know how to approach any of your vendors. And again, like kind of leading into or going back to what we just talked about, right? Being able to give them some actionable items, being able to understand, like, look, here is something in a dependency that we rely on that has some sort of vulnerability in it. We want to work with you to make sure that we can get this remediated, not just for us, but like for the greater community and all of the other people that are relying on this. For me, this is a lot about, again, like inventorying, understanding where your vendor is coming into the software that you're building, where you rely on them for the software that you're building, and just making sure that everything is the way it's supposed to be and that we don't have any of the issues that we just covered in the slide deck.
Yeah, well said. All right, well, we are at time. It looks like there's further questions that we will answer offline. Tony, thank you for your time. It was awesome
Thank
to get to
you.
spend time with you and talk about these topics. That was fun.
Anytime. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, sure thing. And to the audience, thank you for your time and attention. Stay tuned for the next one. Hopefully there isn't, but I have a feeling there might have to be more. All right, folks, have a great day. Take care.